ser evaluada en algún momento, tanto como la conferencia, y si ustedes han leído, ya espero el documento, y se va a hacer algo de evaluación también en eso. Quiero dejar con ustedes a nuestro queridísimo Joseph Urban, que va a hacer la presentación oficial de esto. Joseph.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Urban, and I am General Assistant responsible for Asia and also a member of the organizing team of this Congress. I'm happy to be here with you and feel privileged to have the opportunity to introduce our first guest speaker, Professor Dennis Shirley. Dennis Shirley is Professor of Teacher Education, Special Education, and Curriculum and Instruction at the Lynch School of Education at Boston College. A peripatetic presenter, Dennis has conducted research and led professional development workshops for educators on 26 nations in 6 continents, and his work has been translated into many languages. His most recent book is entitled The New Imperatives of Educational Change, Achievement with Integrity. The second edition of his book, The Mindful Teacher, co-authored with Boston Public School teacher leader Elizabeth McDonald, appeared last year. Dennis is editor-in-chief of the Journal of Educational Change, an indispensable resource for all school leaders. For more information, you are invited to go to his website at www.dennisshirley.com. We have asked Dennis to tell us about the challenges of education, with special emphasis on the efforts made worldwide to create schools that are able to better serve children and youth. Yesterday, I already had the pleasure of talking with him about these questions, and I was happy to experience how Dennis's viewpoint can help us see beyond our world and also to understand the importance of the vision we inherited from St. Joseph Calasanz. So please join me in welcoming our first guest speaker, Professor Dennis Shirley.
Thank you, Yosef. Good afternoon, colleagues. Everyone doing all right? Pumped up? Ready to get some good ideas bouncing around? Great. I know that some of you are jet lagged, and all you can imagine right now is the pleasures of being in a horizontal position. So let's see if we can kind of create some special energy so that we can enjoy each other's company this afternoon. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the structure of the presentation that I would like to be working with you all this afternoon. Could we have the slide deck up, please? It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. This is dramatic tension. Anybody play the drums? Do a little drum roll. Don't worry, colleagues. It's not as bad as having an airplane delayed. Ah, there we go. Just enlarge that. Brilliant. Thank you, Francisco. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to our agenda for the time that we have together. So, what I'd like to cover with you all is, first big question, why is educational change so hard? You know, sometimes some of you are principals, some of you are school leaders, lead schools. Put up your hand, please. Yep. And you kind of have a great idea and you just want to get your faculty to do it. And if they would only do as they're told, then it could fly, right? But then you run into obstacles and then you try and figure out what's the nature of the obstacles. Where does it come from? What can we do? And some of you are working with large, complicated systems with different political agendas, different corporate agendas, different reform agendas. So first of all, maybe we can spend a little time thinking about what is it that makes it so hard for us in education to get better at what we do? What are the barriers to getting better? Okay? And then my personal quest right now, and maybe this is why I'm with you today, is I've been seeing a global push for very, very high achievement that I worry has been neglecting the human dimensions of education. So I want to bring in this theme of integrity. How do we know that we're really doing the best by our students? That we're viewing our students as the ends of education rather than the means to something else. So I want to tell you a little bit about some global trends, and then I want to suggest that those trends have been driven by what I describe as old imperatives or old mandates for change that I feel that we will have to overcome if we want to get to a better future. And for that better future, we will need some new imperatives, which I will be outlining for you. And then if it all comes together, if it all works, then we will be able to have a vision of an inspiring future for educational change. When we go to what we hope is our heavenly reward, we can look our children and our students in the eye and say, yes, we're human beings, we made some mistakes along the way, but in the end, we really gave you the very best that we know how to give you. Everybody okay? Understand the agenda? Speaking at an okay pace? Translations working? Excellent. Okay, great. Let's go into it now. Why is educational change so hard? Why is it hard to get better? And I don't just mean with one thing or another thing here, but to help our schools to be places that are continuously getting better and where we can see our students thriving. Well, I love this quote from John Stuart Mill, writing about education. Of all of the many-sided things, it is the one with the most sides. So sometimes you may wake up and you may think the most important thing in education is I have to make sure that our students really are contributing to this community. But then you'll listen to a corporate presentation that says, wow, automation is coming along. What we really need to be doing now is getting all students learning computer coding because jobs are going to be disappearing along with automation. And then you'll have others who will say, well, really the most important thing is preparing our young people to contribute to our nation. And then there's still others who will say, wow, we have climate change going. We have to kind of contribute to a better future. So educational change is very confusing because there are so many different agendas out there. And you'll know this if you're a school leader or a teacher and you're getting many different voices coming at you from many different angles at the same time. So how do we decide what we should really be organizing our schools around? Now, just for me, the way that I like to think about these things is I just always will ask my colleagues, what's best for our students? So if you're a school leader, your colleagues will come and they'll have different ideas. And they know that if they come to me, at some point I will ask them, explain to me how what you would like to have is best for our students. Now, you might think, okay, that's a good theoretical example, so let me tell a story. I was working in a school where the student results weren't very good, teachers were coming and going, principals were coming and going. There was a lot of turbulence in the building. So the teachers were very demoralized and they thought, you know, we need to do something fun. Our students aren't going to like school unless we like school. So what they decided to do is to put on a skit. So they wrote a school play and they performed it. It was maybe 20 minutes long and it was a lot of fun to do. And the kids liked it and the parents liked it. They said, this is great. So they decided to do it again the next year, but to make it bigger. So the next year they come back, and instead of it being 20 minutes long, it's 40 minutes long. They really like that. So then they think the next year, let's do another performance. Let's make it an hour long rather than 20 minutes or 40 minutes long. You get the idea? All of a sudden, what's happening was an effort to kind of lift morale, and the teachers are now putting all of their energy into performing in a play. Now, at some point, somebody might have needed to ask, tell me how that is the best thing for our students. Because the teachers were so stressed out learning the lines of their play and making the costumes and doing all of those things that they had become distracted from the purpose of education. Are you with me? You understand? So maybe you could kind of be thinking of your own schools and think of sometimes some ways in which the adults with our agendas can get in the way of what's best for the students. Okay, so my suggestion is this happens in a lot of schools that I've been working with. Now, ideally, in the best of all possible worlds, this is what education is. We have a small number of students working closely with a teacher. It's pedagogical paradise. Okay, the students are learning academic content material. The teacher is engaged with the kids. You couldn't ask for better. But then, realistically, our schools often look like this. So you have a student up here repeatedly sharpening a pencil, while another one makes faces in a window. One is combing her hair, one is drawing cartoons, one is carving up the desk. The teacher is in the upper right-hand corner, staring, ignoring disruptions, and planning a career change. That's supposed to be my funny slide. Anyway, okay. So you see the difference. You know, the reality that we often have is more like this. You're dealing with kids. They've got temperamental personalities. They like to challenge you. They like to connect with their friends. They like to play with their iPhones. They like to do 10 million other things than to focus on their learning. So what does this mean for teachers when they're in this environment day after day interacting with children? So I like to use this book a lot. I think it's one of maybe the 2 or 3 most important books that was written about education in the last century, School Teacher by Dan Lordy. Talk to me, sugar. Talk to me, darling. Okay, so what Dan Lordy says is that there's 3 aspects, just 3 aspects to teachers' professional cultures that we should be aware of. And the first one is he uses a $10 word, presentism. So when you're a teacher, you have a lot of stuff coming at you all the time. And if you're not careful, we just develop these mechanisms of responding to the latest thing that came in through the door. Or maybe you're still just out in the school parking lot. You don't even make it into the building, and you're being bombarded with stimulus. And the same thing can happen to you if you're a principal. So what Dan Lordy said is that teachers become very prone to short-term thinking. You're just trying to manage this month, or maybe this week, or maybe this day, or maybe this morning, or maybe this class, or maybe the next 10 minutes so you can get your break and get another cup of coffee and get rejuvenated. You with me? Okay, so this was the research finds that teachers are often in a culture of presentism, short-term thinking. The other part that Lordy said is teachers often inhabit a culture of privatism. That means we agree to shut the door, just let me teach. I don't want any external visitors coming in. It's my kingdom, go away. Okay? So Lordy said that this is also a characteristic of teachers' work. So if you kind of imagine people maybe working in a technology startup where people are sharing information all the time, or even on the old-fashioned factory floor where people were assembling things together, teachers' workplaces are often somewhat different. Okay? They're individualistic, or you could say privatized. Then the third thing that Lordy said about teachers' work is that teachers often become conservative. You try something new, it doesn't work, let's go back to what I did before. Your principal says, try another new thing, you try that out, it doesn't work, let's go back to what I did before. You try a number of different things, and then eventually you're kind of, okay, I'm going to go back to the basic thing that works here. But we have to be very careful, because what we can be doing is going back to what helps us to manage the class, not necessarily what helps students to flourish. So the upshot from this research was that if something doesn't happen in this default culture of education, you can end up with a learning impoverished schools. So the adults come in and they perform teaching, the students come in and they perform being good students. But the learning in the whole organization is limited. Okay? So people kind of learn up to a certain point, and then school becomes a set of routines. Now then, what can we do about this? I think a number of different things. So how do you get from a learning impoverished to a learning enriched school? If this research is right, if it's right, might not be right, but if it's right, what you want to try and do is help your teachers to get them out of short-term thinking or presentism, is to help the teachers look back at the best things that they've done and help them to project forward to where they would like to go, where they'd like to go next with their teaching. So they're not caught in short-term thinking, but they have a longer time perspective. Okay? So how is this all relevant right now? Well, if somebody's coming to your school and saying, we need 21st century skills, we've got to get these computers going and all that, that can be good. But just make sure that your teachers are able to hold on to the best practice that maybe they spent years honing, getting better and better with. And then we've done a lot with this in the US. This has been the major reform effort of recent years, trying to help colleagues to work together. It's not easy. Somehow we feel that with teaching, it's a very private thing. You know, you kind of cut a deal. You don't tell me how to improve my teaching, and I won't tell you. And we'll all pretend that we're all great all of the time. I'm trying to provoke a little bit here. So how can we help people to get out of the individualism of their practice to learning together as a community? That would be collegiality. And then the third component would be a developmental perspective. So if teachers are becoming conservative, it doesn't mean that they need to become radical. It doesn't mean that they need to become liberal. But we want to help them to develop throughout the lifespan so that they're getting better and better and better at what they do. And if we can do these things, the research would suggest, then your teachers won't want to leave the classroom. They'll want to come because they are flourishing, because they're getting support. And most of the international research shows that teachers leave because of inadequate support. That's what they say. So they're getting opportunities to flourish in terms of thinking of their whole lifespan. They're getting opportunities to flourish because you're helping them to work together with colleagues in highly interactive teams. And they're getting together to flourish because they continue to learn across the whole lifespan. You guys with me so far? Okay. Everybody all right? Should we do a little turn and talk? Would it help you to kind of turn and talk with some colleagues for a few minutes? Would that be good? Yeah. Okay. So just turn to your tables now. Take 3 to 5 minutes to discuss what you think about what you've heard so far, please. Okay. I hope you've had the chance to talk to a neighbor. And the translator just told me that I was speaking too quickly, so I will try to slow down. Very hard for me. I get very excited whenever I teach. Let's see how I do. So one of the things that you can think about, and sometimes when I work with schools, we can spend a whole day just working on this part. So we can kind of do an assessment and we can say, well, how well are we doing helping our colleagues to learn across the lifespan? Do we help them to go back and revisit their best practices and to project forward? We can say, how well are we doing helping our colleagues to get better at their teaching? Do we create opportunities for them to visit each other's classrooms? Do we help them to develop structures for giving each other feedback? And once they've received some information, do they get better at that? So what are some of the pathways that we can explore in improving our school? So you can do a lot just with this part so far, okay? And what really happened in North America is people really got into this collegiality part. So if I have a room full of educators and I create 3 different corners in the room and I ask them, okay, of these different approaches to improvement, please go and stand in the corner where you feel you've been doing the most work. Almost everybody goes over and stands by the collegiality corner. So one of the things to think about is it's a little bit like cycling. One pedal is always up and one is always down. So as we're thinking about school improvement, where are you on your journey? Okay? And then you could think about maybe we need to be doing something different for a while. So that's all good so far. We have a delayed reaction response here with the screen. Francisco, help me. It's like when you're out on a date, you know, and you're trying to get a reaction, and there's this stone cold face. This is good if you like skiing. Okay, let's talk about winter sports. Teaching is the art of being creative, right? When you're faced with surprises. You know, it would be kind of great if you could kind of imagine, you know, those situations when you go into a class and you planned everything out in just spectacular, you know, meticulous detail, and then you go in and the students' minds are completely somewhere else. That's what I'm having. I'm having that moment. Oh, look. Well, now we see everybody else. Am I having a dream? I dream that I'm in a wedding and I'm on the stage and I'm talking about educational change. Is this a dream? I dreamed that I'm in Chile. Chile is very important to me because 39 years ago, my wife was an exchange student in Ñuñoa. She went to Liceo Número 9. And I didn't find her very interesting when I was first kind of, you know, dating her. But then she started telling me about the friends that she'd had in Chile. And she started telling me about Violeta Parra. She started telling me about Pablo Neruda. She started telling me about Victor Jara. And we started listening to their music. And then I would start getting really jealous because it seemed that she liked Victor Jara more than me. But eventually we got things around, and we've now been married for almost 30 years. So that was an interesting story. So what it means is if we're down here and we're on holiday over in Reñaca or Valparaíso, what it means is that we can go into a restaurant and somebody will start playing some magnificent Violeta Parra song like Volver a los 17, returning to 17, and it's just somebody just pushes a button that we should start crying. Okay, let me just kind of zip things along here. This is what they call a review. Bear with me. I think maybe I have to kind of keep moving it. Francisco, is that it? Do I just have to keep moving it forward a little bit more quickly? We'll see. So then this was the bad old triangle. I sometimes call it the Bermuda Triangle of educational change. Learning impoverished school. And then you get to the happy learning enriched school, where the teachers are learning a lot. We have to keep our teachers nourished, because without that, the students can't really flourish. So we have the learning enriched school. And then the news. Great. So what's some of the stuff that's going on in the world? Now, I've listened to your presentations today. I've learned a lot about the Pyrrhus. It's an amazing story. The idea that 400 years ago, a school was started for children that was free on a daily basis. That is an amazing story. What a human achievement. But if we look at the news around the world today, we see a lot of pressures on educators that will sometimes lead them to do things that are not right. So in the US, we've had a number of instances of schools and school systems where there's so much pressure on the educators to get the achievement results up that they cheat. The teachers cheat, the principals cheat. But it's not just in the US. On international exams, China decided to test on the international PISA test only its most affluent city in Shanghai. And it was amazing. They got the world's best results in reading and math and in science, but they also tested only their very brightest students. Now, if you have a country with 1.3 billion students, your best students are probably really smart. So what's happening is it's not just individual teachers, but it's also systems are learning kind of how to game evaluation systems. And then also in England, the report came out that cheating is happening a lot. Now, it's one thing when students cheat, but it's another thing when something is going on in the system that encourages people to cheat. Now, what could that be and how should we cope with it? Well, often in education, we just decide to deny that there is a problem. And if you think about it, it's not really that bad because, you know, it's a nice warm beach. I live in Boston. We haven't seen much sun for a long time. And, you know, the individual has a nice Rolex watch and some nice Italian shoes from Milano. So it's not that bad of a situation. That also was supposed to be a humorous slide. Oh, well, never mind. Okay. So we end up with this situation. How do we kind of find our way beyond that? So I love this article, Goals Gone Wild. What happens to people psychologically when you establish goals that they cannot reach? It's beyond their reach. Well, in a lot of the business literature, we are told choose really big, hairy, audacious goals. Choose really big goals. But we've been learning that if you don't provide a lot of supports along with that, people will become so fixated on hitting the goals that they will do almost anything to get there. So you have a situation there of goals gone wild. Now let's imagine here that we had everybody in this room was a mountaineer, and we all wanted to climb Mount Everest. And you've got oxygen tanks on your back, and you're going up and you're ascending, and it's magnificent. You're gonna make it. You've been training for years, and you just wanna make it to the top, but you're getting more and more exhausted. Your oxygen tanks are giving out, but you know that you can make it, and you make it up to the top of Everest. It's fabulous. It's the best emotion you ever had in your life. It's better than anything else. You just forgot one thing. You have to get back down. Okay. So as we are thinking of our goals, it's very important to look at the goals in a broader context and remember that we're dealing with human beings in schools. So how do we kind of get out of a context that has been very goal fixated? Well, maybe we start thinking about achievement in some different ways. Often we're thinking about our students' tested results, but we could be, yes, magnificent. We could be thinking about achievement as the attainment of a worthy goal. So if you have students in your school and they're really focused on the grades and their academics, Maybe one of the best things you could do for them was to get them to play a musical instrument, get them to play in a sport, get them to do something outside. And then we can also think of achievement as a result of a school or of a school system here. This is what I'm most interested in. And it's not just because in 2004, the Boston Red Sox were playing, they were up against the New York Yankees, and they had a self-described team of idiots where nobody was really good. But as a team, they came together to collaborate, and schools can do that also. So you can think of your school as more than a collection of individuals. It's a group of people who know how to work together well. So we could think of achievement this way, and then we can ask ourselves, what is integrity when we work in our schools? So you can think of integrity as a personal characteristic. You say one thing, and then you do something that goes along with that. So what you say and what you do reinforces each other. In English, we say, it's a nice expression, we walk the talk, right? You don't say one thing and do something else. So integrity can be a personal characteristic. It also can be a professional disposition. I want my students to flourish. I'm devoted to my students. I'm devoted to my students' learning. And then it could also be a characteristic of a system. A system supports all the students. There's been a lot of attention given to Finland in the international press. And you go to Finland and you look at their schools and you kind of feel like, wow, it's 1950s. There's nothing special going on here. But what Finland actually has created is incredibly supported by the whole society. So that's what integrity as a school system could look like. So how do we relate achievement with integrity? How do we do those two things? So you've got good moral purpose and you've got good student learning. Well, I've worked in schools that have neither achievement nor integrity. And so these are schools often struggling in urban neighborhoods, very, very high poverty rates, or they're in remote rural communities. And in the US and in other jurisdictions, England, parts of Australia, parts of Canada, what you do is you get in a new principal and you kind of hire new staff, and then you have everybody working at intense speed, phenomenal speed, pounding away on student learning. But meanwhile, you're cutting corners. You're just focusing on tested subjects. So in the end, what you often get with that scenario is low achievement and low integrity. But then there are other schools where you might get in some of your brightest young students, and you get them to work 70-hour work weeks. We have a program, Teach for America, is like this, and it has analogs in other countries. And you get them throwing everything that they've got at their instruction, and they're working really, really hard, and they get the achievement to shoot up for a few years. And then what happens is people get older. All of a sudden they want to start a family. All of a sudden they have children. All of a sudden their parents are getting older. They need other things. So you've created a system that does not see achievement for a little time, but then it gives out. Then I think also you can have low achievement with high integrity. So I worked in one school in a southern city in the US, and this school always had disastrous results, and the district didn't know what to do. So they brought in a principal who was a minister in a local church to be their school principal. And this minister loved everybody. He loved the students. He loved the parents. He loved his staff. I called him Dr. Love. The answer to any problem in the school was more love. But there was a problem because he never had any specific strategies about how you get the school to be better, other than just more love. But actually, sometimes you need to know the academic content. You need to know different ways of teaching, different ways of assessing students. And then if we can, we try to get to high achievement and high integrity. So one of my old students, Andy Bott, became the principal of Orchard Garden K-8 school in Boston. This school was known as a principal killer. If you went in that school as a principal, you would be fired at the end of the year. The kids were turbulent. The security guards couldn't control them. The achievement was a disaster. It was right next to a big public housing project that was packed with crime. So what did Andy do? He went in, he looked at the situation, and So what he did is he fired all of the security guards in the school, and he took that money and he did a nationwide search for the best art and music teachers he could find in the whole country. And then he took that school and he transformed it into a place where if a student was misbehaving, they're given a paintbrush or they're given a saxophone. They're given something else that they can practice on and they can develop expertise on. What happened in Orchard Gardens? The results go up, right? Because the leadership was paying attention and took a high risk. I've also worked at a school in Hildesheim, Germany, where not many people wanted to send their kids to the school. It was a good school, but just didn't have any sparkle. So the teachers got together and they said, we have to prove our teaching. How can we do that? They said, well, what are we looking for when we teach anyway? They decided to attack this culture of privatism. And they said, well, we're looking for an introduction that will engage the kids right away. We're looking for material that they'll find relevant and engaging. We're looking for support as the kids are working in the classroom. We're looking for ways of giving them feedback that they'll find precise and helpful. So the teachers came up with their own protocol for how they could improve their teaching. They owned the reform. It was their reform. It wasn't coming from anywhere else. And then Robert Bosch Gesamtschule, that achievement shot up also. So educational change can be hard, ladies and gentlemen, I will suggest, when we are distracted, when we're thinking about kind of everything else than the students and their learning. Then it's very, very difficult. If we focus on the students we have in front of us and their learning, then I think we can get to high achievement and high integrity. So please now, if you could turn to your colleagues again and discuss this question: what issues does this discussion about the relationship between achievement and integrity raise for me? That's a turn and talk, so now you get a chance to talk with your colleagues. I put that in there so those of you who are really jet lagged would have a chance to wake up a bit. yo hablado con algunas personas sobre esta pregunta en español y para mí es una pregunta sobre la relación entre los resultados académicos y el desarrollo del humano ser. ¿Entiendes? Para mí es tal vez un poco más fácil cuando hablo en español. Un poco he aprendido mucho español de mi esposa y sus amigas. Su mejor amiga vive siempre en Santiago. ¿Entiendes? Okay, so we're trying to figure out the relationship between the development of the whole human being, which in Catholic schools you've been doing for a long time, and what is happening in other systems that are focused very much on narrow definitions of academic achievement, which I suggest is a very limited and crippling way of thinking about education. Okay? So I'm trying to problematize relationship. You don't really have to worry so much about this yet, because what I see is a lot of global trends start working their way into the Catholic schools that I work with. And you make the best possible relationship between our struggles for achievement and integrity. You might not want to do what they do in South Korea, which gets some of the top results on international tests, but the very bottom level results on how much students like being in school. Okay, that's one way to think about it. Oh, can you hear? Es mejor. Lo siento. I get so excited. How can we think about optimizing this relationship? So, what I want to suggest Francisco, ayúdame. What I want to suggest to you is that we have been working in educational change internationally with a framework which is now bankrupt, and we need to move to a new framework. Okay? That is what I will be suggesting. And I will suggest that the old framework had 5 imperatives or theories of action, and that if we want to help our students to flourish as whole human beings for the whole world, we will have to be rethinking education. If we can kind of do this on a system-wide level. Because a lot of the organizations that have been pushing educational change in recent years have fairly narrow economic agendas that involve defining our students as bearers of human capital. So when students are taught, they are approached primarily for their value as future wage earners. This can work for a while, and we certainly want our students to be as prosperous as they can. However, the suggestion here will be that if we really want to uplift the human condition for the common good, a human capital approach will not be adequate. We will have to do the hard work of imagining what kind of a future we envision for our students and for our planet. And we will have to endeavor to slay the lions of injustice that make educational change so difficult. Thank you. So I'm going to suggest there are 5 old imperatives that have gotten in the way of optimizing our educational systems. And the first one is ideological, a powerful ideology of markets and of testing. The second one is imperial, so that educational change has been pushed a lot globally from my own country, the United States, also the United Kingdom, putting out models of educational change that support this economic agenda. Educational change has also been prescriptive, so if countries didn't want to follow the agenda that was put out by the world, they wouldn't get funding. And then in the nations that have been pushing for a model of educational change focused on students as wage earners, these nations have become increasingly insular. So I wrote my book on this before Donald Trump was elected president. But what you can kind of see happening in the United States now is it's becoming more and more inward looking. You can see the same thing that happened in the United Kingdom after Brexit. The same thing may be happening in France. And this is part of a global trend. And then maybe you say to yourself, well, wait, Holland didn't vote. Okay, Holland kind of held things back, but even there, the prime minister tacked a lot to a nationalist agenda. So this is happening globally. We have to figure out what we're going to do about that. And then finally, a lot of education has been instrumental. We teach our students these sets of skills so that they can optimize these values or sets of skills in the marketplace. Okay, so this is the contention, that this is how we've been working now for maybe about 25 years in educational change. And then I try and say, well, we've got a whole bunch of different things we could be thinking about. So instead of being driven by ideology, what does evidence tell us? And then the numbers never tell you exactly what you need to do, so you have to learn to interpret the numbers based on your moral vision for education. So you have to figure out, what do you really stand for? What do you really care about? Okay? What are you willing to dedicate your life to? What do you want to be remembered? We have a professional imperative, and this is the opposite of the prescriptive imperative. Teaching is so complicated that even if you wanted to tell teachers every single thing that they must do, there will be so many surprising situations that you couldn't do it. So instead, you have to help your teachers to become good decision makers. How do we do that as part of a new professionalism? And then a global imperative. So I told you the story about my wife being here, right? And how we had a connection around Chilean history that has transformed my life for the better. In our world today, our young people are increasingly crossing international lines. I love this quote from Pablo Casals, the cellist. He said, "Love of the country is a beautiful thing, but why does a love have to stop at the border?" And of course, in Catholic schools, it's a very strong part of the gospel. We're concerned about improving the human condition. And then finally, this is the one that I care the most about. Human beings need to give their lives meaning. It's not enough to earn money. It's not enough to be a good citizen. It's not enough to know a lot of stuff. Human beings need to give our lives meaning. And what can schools do to help with that? So now I'm going to run through this. Translators, is this okay how I'm speaking? You're okay, thumbs up, great. All right, so let's go first to the ideological imperative, and how could we move from a focus on ideology to a focus on evidence? Well, some of the younger folks in the room might not know this, but back in 1973, my own government, the United States, was involved in overthrowing Salvador Allende here in Chile, and a marketplace model of reform has been imposed here in Chile, and it's one of the most extreme in the entire world. So Chile has been improving on international assessments, but the gap between the most high achieving and the low achieving students very strongly correlated to social class, which has explained why the student movements here have been so strong in recent years. So Chile began with these reforms, but then it was really England under Maggie Thatcher that made an ideological program of marketplace models of reform in education. Then those spread to the United States, where they've been very popular in a number of states, and to Western Australia, and to even Sweden, social democratic Sweden. Liberia in Western Africa has contracted out its entire public education system to a for-profit business now. This happened a few months ago. And then in India and in China also we're seeing a flourishing of education defined as a profit-making business. So, and even in Singapore, high-achieving Singapore, 80% of the students go to after-school academic programs. So what we're seeing is a flourishing of education as a marketplace model of reform. So how can we focus on education as a business? And this is spreading now virally globally. Strong emphasis on accountability, students' tested results. So the argument here is this has been an ideology, and in the United States it hasn't helped our achievement a lot. It's been flat. In England and Sweden the results have declined. So this model is increasingly bankrupt in terms of the evidence, but it remains popular among policymakers. So I try to argue that we should be looking at evidence better, and if we look at evidence better, we can look at countries like Germany that looked at a number of these kinds of reforms and decided wasn't really going to pursue that path and has been getting better. We can look at Japan, strong public education system. Norway also has one. And Finland is the one that's most often mentioned. Switzerland, multilingual Switzerland does very well. Singapore does well in its system. Eastern Australia, New South Wales. Kenya has decided to not allow the profiteers in. And then my favorite is Canada. Bono the rock star said the world needs more Canada. I think he's right. Canada manages to have a very strong public system. Catholic schools are part of the system. Students don't have to pay any tuition to go to Catholic schools because it's a strong public system. Okay. All schools are supported well. Canada's achievement results are in the very top. Okay. Whether you're in a public Catholic or a public non-religious school. So Canada's a country I think we can learn a lot from, and the components of this are strong public investment in education, investing a lot of funding in education, focusing on the development of the whole person, the whole child, not just the future wage earner, and focusing on an education for the common good. So this is a big part of an argument I'm trying to present wherever I go, is that we can do better than marketplace models of reform, and we really need to be thinking about them differently. Then one of the strange things is the United States projects so much power, England projects so much power, that even when the evidence is not there, other countries will often follow it. So Australia, for example, has been doing very well on international assessments, but a number of the states in Australia have still decided to follow what the US and England were doing, almost without any critical reflection. Just follow it up without any evidence or questioning. Now Germany, on the other hand, Germany is an amazing story, I think, in human history. Totally bombed to smithereens by 1945. Today a very strong liberal democracy, accepted in over 1 million refugees last year. The educational system has been improving and becoming more equitable. So they're not following the model, so you don't have to follow what is being pushed out from the US or the UK. So educators do this in good schools and in good environments anyway. They interpret evidence. And I love this book, Enseñar y Aprender con Interés, por Gabriel Cámara and colleagues in Mexico. They created a system of tutorial relations in schools, students coaching students, that has been highly successful in terms of their achievement results, and there are now some 60 schools in Chile that are trying out this approach. Gabriel Cámara is a former Jesuit, and I think that plays very strongly in his educational reform. There's a lovely book called Flip the System so that students are served first. And then I did this little book, The Mindful Teacher, with teacher colleagues. So I wonder in your schools, do you give teachers opportunity to ever read research together, ever ask each other what it could mean for getting better in your schools? Do you ever kind of go after a professor in a school of education and say, come and work with us? Okay, that's what I have done working with Boston Public School teachers. So we can move from an imperial to an interpretive imperative. And I'll just say a little bit more about this, and then we'll have another turn and talk, please. How do we get from prescription to professionalism? Now this is one that I'm going to ask you to pay special attention to. Remember how when Lordy talked about collegiality, he meant colleagues coming and visiting each other? What's happened in a lot of schools and school systems, including that of Dr. Love, is it actually turned into the principal in the building doing all of the evaluations. Now you have to do some of that as part of your job, but the research actually tells us the best way to get teachers to improve is to get them better as a team, giving each other feedback. So in Boston, we've done a lot of clipboarding, okay, outside people showing up in the classroom, assessing teachers' work, and then disappearing. That's not a highly effective strategy. In the higher education level, also what we're doing now is a colleague will come to me, say, please observe my teaching. We confer before I go to the class. I then observe the class, take meticulous notes. Afterwards, we discussed what happened. Okay? So these are the kinds of things where we can get up close looking at each other's teaching that will be promising futures for us that you could ask yourself about. But meanwhile, here's what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa. So there are schools being run by a group called Bridge International Academy. And you saw the teacher there with the iPad. What's happening is that curriculum developers in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right across the river from where I live, where Harvard and MIT are, they develop curricula. Then the teacher gets that curriculum on their iPad and reads it literally to the students. There's a webcam up in the classroom telling the folks back in Cambridge what's going on with the instruction. You could see this in one way as the ultimate deprofessionalization of teaching. And indeed, one independent report says Bridge has streamlined their operations and has largely removed teachers and administrators from the educational process altogether. And you might say, well, this is happening in sub-Saharan Africa. What does this have anything to do with me? Anybody recognize this? I think the younger people are looking at the room saying, yes, that was a dinosaur, wasn't it? This was an Apple IIe, and there's a great story about the Apple IIe. It was invented to be a children's computer. So I did my doctoral work at Harvard in the 1980s, and when I first started working on it, I bought an IBM computer, but then I switched over to an Apple IIe because it was easier to use. So a computer that was designed originally for children became something that a doctoral student at Harvard was doing his dissertation on. And this was the beginning of Apple just surging and the decline of IBM. This is a good book to read, The Innovator's Dilemma, When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail. So what we should be paying a lot of attention to in education right now is the provision of these online services where you can remove administrators and teachers from the process altogether. And you might say, well, that's so inhumane. Where's the human relations? Education's all about the relationships, the dialogue. Well, then you should be concerned. You should be very concerned about what's coming because it's a lot cheaper to redesign schools to use that Bridge International Academy model. So how do we try and develop our professionalism so we get past that? Well, Michael Fullen and Andy Hargraves wrote a book called Professional Capital, and they said teachers' professionalism resides in three components. They need to be really smart. They have to have good human capital as individuals. So if you're a school leader, what are you doing to help your teachers get smarter in their subject matter? What are you doing? Nothing is not an answer. Okay, what are you doing to help them to get smarter? And then extremely important now is the social capital. How do you help people to work together? How do you help teachers to get to that place where they could go to a colleague and say, I feel like a failure, I'm just not doing well enough, and they wouldn't feel judged by their colleagues? That's a key question for me. We all struggle as teachers from time to time, but in many schools, teachers feel that if they confess to some vulnerability, their colleagues will judge them harshly. And then the third component, decisional capital. How can we help teachers to get good at making really difficult decisions? Really difficult decisions. So, you know, you're up there, you planned a lesson you really care about, you're presenting it, it's dynamic, and you turn around and everybody's asleep. So then what do you do as a teacher? Do you kind of keep on hoping it'll all come together? Do you introduce something new, make a connection to somebody's home? Do you ask everybody to get up and wave their arms around? What do you do? Good teachers in those situations make good judgments. So how do we support that kind of decision making? Now, Michael and Andy use this kind of fancy $10 words here. At the same time, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said, human capital, that's knowledge. That's really important. That's what teachers need. They need to be smart. They need good peer networks. They need to know how to work together in teams and share information. And then finally, they need some autonomy. They need some autonomy. They need some independence. Why am I even here? Why am I even in Chile? Some of you are probably wondering this right now. What am I doing here? Right? So it happened that in 1971, I was an alienated, angry young man. I didn't like school very much. I had an English teacher. Her name was Mrs. Alexander. She had a big beehive hairdo, like Dolly Parton. She was pretty short, okay, former airline stewardess, a little bit plump, big southern accent. And she said to me, Dennis, you seem to be kind of alienated. You're not concentrating. This is a public school. And I said, yeah, it's true. Well, why don't you put together a proposal for an independent study? So I put together a proposal for an independent study, and I didn't know, it would be like asking a Chilean student, you know, well, what do you want to read? And maybe they say, I want to read something by Pablo Neruda. I keep hearing about him, right? So we didn't have Pablo Neruda, but we had Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick. So I said, Mrs. Alexander, I want to read Moby Dick. There is a point to this story. Just bear with me. So that's great. So I read Moby Dick over the Christmas break. I came back in early January. She says, Dennis, are you ready to get started reading Moby Dick? And I said, I've already read it, Mrs. Alexander. She said, great. What is the first sentence? Does anybody know the first sentence of Moby Dick? It's call me Ishmael. Does anybody know who Ishmael was in the Bible? Who knows? You do, sir? Can you put up your hand? Okay. You just won a free book. Thank you. ¿Y qué idioma? ¿Español? Español. Okay. ¿Quién es Ismael?
El hermano de Isaac.
El hermano de Isaac.
Isaac.
¿Y los padres?
Y el padre era el hijo de Abraham.
Sí. ¿Y la madre?
La Rebeca. No, la esposa. La esclava Agar.
Agar. Ok. ¿Qué es la historia de Ismael? ¿Cuál es su situación en esta familia?
Iba a morir de hambre con su mamá.
Sí.
Y entonces el ángel Dios tuvo compasión de él, Yahvé, y le dio una salida, le dio comida.
Sí. Muchísimas gracias, Señor. Muchísimas gracias. So the story, if I understand it correctly, is that Sarah is not able to have a baby. Okay, and then in her 70s, God blesses her womb and gives her Isaac. But meanwhile, earlier on, Sarah had said, Abraham, you're supposed to be a biblical patriarch and you don't have any children. The whole story is not going to work unless you have a son. You can't be a patriarch without a son. So then she says, why don't you sleep with the slave girl, Hagar? Which he then says, okay. He's very agreeable. So then he sleeps with her, and then they have this son, Ishmael. Then all of a sudden, here's Isaac. So then Sarah says, this Hagar, Ishmael thing is no good. Can you get rid of them, please? And Abraham says, do I have to? And she says, yeah, you have to. So then he kicks them out, and then they're out in the desert. And the Bible says of Ishmael, his hand shall be raised against every man's hand. He's the alienated son. He's the son who has been rejected by his father. Any of you have any students like that in your schools? Alienated young men, angry, don't feel like they fit in, oppositional, want to fight back. And so he's out in the desert, abandoned by his father. But then, we have a lot of theologians here, so I'm hesitant to say this, but I understand that Ishmael means in ancient Hebrew, God hears. God hears. God hears Ishmael, hears his cries, hears his mother's cries, and they are delivered. Now, why do I tell you this story? Who cares? Because I had an English teacher, ladies and gentlemen, who taught me that if you want to understand the world, you have to decode it. I had read the whole book. I didn't understand it. Now I understood that if you want to understand the world, you have to really work at it. You have to know a lot. You have to have a teacher who cares, a teacher who looks out and says, you're not with this group. How are we going to connect to you? Right? That's why I'm here. That's why I testify. I had a magnificent teacher. So please, turn to your colleagues now and discuss, is this a good way forward as we think of our profession today? Thank you. Por favor, hablar con los otros.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, colleagues, if we can come back together. So these are some things maybe that you can be thinking about as we
continue with this conference and as you head back home. Basically, the issue here is teaching a profession or is it something else? Decades ago, an American sociologist wrote a book called The Semi-Professions. It's kind of a half of a profession, he said, Amitai et Zioni. He said, people have some expertise, they know stuff, but it's not like being a surgeon, it's not like being a judge. It's looser than that. I feel that we need to say that teaching is a profession, that there's a specialized body of knowledge. I have a niece, my sister adopted a little girl from Russia who had fetal alcohol symptoms, not fetal alcohol syndromes. The person who noticed this and observed it was a teacher. My sister is highly educated, but she needed a teacher who could identify these symptoms. That's professional knowledge. And if we're going to protect our schools in the decades ahead, we're going to have to figure out how to communicate to the public our professionalism better. So I've got two more imperatives. Please just bear with me and then we'll wrap this whole thing up. How do we help people in the world to understand that we get more out of interacting with each other than retreating into our rabbit holes of nationalism and xenophobia? How do we do that? So, one thing that we have to do is get rid of the wall in your head, der Mauer im Kopf. This was an expression that used to be used by Germans when the Berlin Wall was still up. It meant that you have a wall in your head and you separate yourself off from other people, even of your very own country. So I was talking with one of the colleagues who said here, I like to go where the abandoned places are. I like to go to serve where nobody else is willing to go. I work in a Jesuit college and university. I applaud my Jesuit friends and colleagues for their courage to go to the toughest neighborhoods on the planet. So these are Syrian children. So how do we help these children to let them know that they have a place in this world also? UNESCO came out with this report, which I love, which if you don't know about, I recommend. It's written in Spanish. Aprendizaje el tesoro adentro. UNESCO said we need to do 4 things in the 21st century. We need to know. We need to be smart. We need to know how to make things. Okay, that's very important, that we're constructive. But third, this is really courageous, I thought. And here you really see a separation from human capital theories of education. We need to know how to be. How should I be in the world? How can I work on being a better person, not being selfish, okay? Caring for others, caring for the natural environment. And then what UNESCO said was going to be most important for our century, the 4th one, learning to be together. So look at how magnificent you guys are. You're from all over the world. That's the future. Okay? We are in this network of mutual dependency. What a thrill. What a thrill. And you're tied together by your faith and by core convictions that you want to put into action. How exquisite. What more could you ask from life than that? To be with like-minded colleagues who care about the human condition, who have a message of redemption and sacrifice. A lot of people don't even know that in the UN, the countries of the world passed the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, which guarantee, on paper, every child the right to a free, high-quality education and the right to play. The right to play. Remember Maria Montessori? Play is children's work. The right to play. How do we build that into our school so that children can play freely, not directed by the adults, but self-directed play? Well, there we need, I love this German word, we don't have a translation for it in English, Weltoffenheit, openness to the world. The closest thing I've seen to that is being open-minded, but it's a different thing, being open to the world, being curious about others. learning other languages. That's part of what you're doing, openness to the world. And then this is magnificent, if you haven't read it, by Pope Francis, Our Common Home, focusing on our endangered planet. So it's interesting, earlier I said that the real question should be asking what's best for our students, but I mean that in a very long-term sort of way. What kind of a world will we be passing on to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren? It's a beautiful document. So how do we take care of our whole planet? And then finally, this one, how do we move from thinking about our students in instrumental terms to understanding that they are human beings who want to imbue life with meaning and purpose and beauty? How do we do that? Hard in the current context when so much is going the other way. So much of what's happening in our schools today is what Gert Biesta calls learnification, turning all of schooling into learning to prepare for tests and competition. Well, maybe life could be more than that, which was what Mrs. Alexander taught me. But of course, we all have to deal with, I love this from San Juan de la Cruz, La Noche Oscura del Alma. How to help our students to understand that you're going to have crises in your life from time to time. You'll have a crisis of faith. There'll be somebody who is your best friend who betrays you. A good friend could have a brain tumor. A good friend could be killed by a drunk driver. A good friend could die of kidney failure. A month ago, one of my best friends was teaching a spinning class, a cycling class. He was 57 years old, had a massive heart attack and died in the middle of the class. His wife was in the class. How do we help each other to understand that being human is challenging? It's got many different dimensions that will surprise us. Well, some of it is we shouldn't just tell students that everything is supposed to be fun. To be a full human being means some struggle. It means some challenges. And then we can be redeemed. Let's listen to our students' voices. I love this. This is from a Canadian student who said, "Don't give up on us. Even though we aren't always easy and we know your jobs are really hard, please don't give up on us." You know some students in your own school who could say that to you? The students who are really struggling, they challenge you all year long, and then finally it gets to vacation time and they come back up to your school because they have nowhere else to go, right? So how do we find the courage to continue to work with those students? Now, I'm a very fortunate and a very privileged person, but I've always loved this memoir from Primo Levi of his time in Auschwitz, the concentration camp, in 1944 and 1945. Se questo è un uomo. This is kind of my last story of our presentation. There's a chapter there where Primo Levi is told to go and get lunch for the other camp inmates, and he's going with a young man from France, and this young man, Jean, says he wants to learn some Italian from Primo Levi. And at this point, most of the other Italian prisoners have been killed off. So there's two languages left in the camp. There's German and there's Polish. Jean says, "Will you please teach me some Italian?" And so Primo Levi decides that he wants to quote from Dante's Inferno. And he says these lines from the Inferno: "Considerate la vostra semenza, fatti non fosti a vivere come brute, ma per seguir virtute e conoscenza," which translates into, "Consider from what noble seed you spring. You are created not to live like beasts, but for the pursuit of virtue and of knowledge." And Primo Levi's struggling to remember these lines, and he finally remembers these lines. And then he says, "It was like the sound of a trumpet call. It was like the voice of God. For a moment, I forgot where I was and what had been done to me." Now that's an education for purpose and meaning when you're struggling. And I thought it was such a beautiful passage. And when I was in Venice in the fall, I went over to this little graveyard island of San Michele. And look at what I found. There's me. And there's a graveyard. There's a cemetery. "Fatti non foste a vivere come brute, ma per seguir virtute e conoscenza," Dante Alighieri. So I wonder what you're giving in your schools. I wonder what you're giving to your kids. And it should reflect your cultural heritage, right? It should reflect your values. We need the diversity of the world's cultures. We desperately need those. There's so many things, so many expressions that even though I love the English language, one of the colleagues earlier today used the Spanish word profundizar, profundizar. And you can't translate profundizar into a verb in English. You can only say to go deeper. Now we have profound, but we don't have profundizar. Wow, isn't that just the most beautiful bouquet you could ever ask for? What that word does, it just opens up so many possibilities. So let's give our kids poetry. Let's give them art. Let's give them music. Let's give them wonderful physical education. Let's help them enjoy all of the different dimensions of being a human being. And if we can do this the right way, as professionals, we'll get really good at studying evidence. We'll get smart looking at it. But then we'll hold on to our core values. We'll say it's a lot more about evidence. It's what our convictions are. So we'll get better at interpreting the evidence. And then we'll say in our little school, in our little network, it's not enough. We have to care about the whole profession. We need to care about teachers in Ghana, teachers in Indonesia, teachers in Peru, teachers in Venezuela today. How are they surviving? How are they making it? And then we have to uplift this whole profession around the world, wherever teaching and learning may be going on, and understand it's our responsibility to be global citizens, cosmopolitan citizens, and get rid of the curse of nationalism and xenophobia and withdrawing and building walls and all of these other things that get in the way of our shared humanity. And if we can do these things, then we can embellish our lives with meaning, beauty, purpose. We can tell our students that we love them because they are fellow human beings and that we care about their future, and they will feel that love, and they will aspire to be good, and they will aspire to make a contribution to the human condition. And if we can do all those things, we can recover the grandeur of education. So please don't ever say, I'm only a 4th grade teacher. Please never ever say, I am only a principal. Please never ever say, I am only an educator. What if Mrs. Alexander had said that? She changed my life. She died 30 years ago. She's still alive for me today. So, this is our challenge. This is our cause. We need to unite as a profession, come together to help one another in multiracial, multilingual communities of learning and practice. We need to be mindful, get better about thinking what we're doing, but we also have to understand at the same time that it's important to act. We can't just reflect forever. And if we can do these things, we will leave footprints in the sand of time. And here's one thing you cannot do with your life. You cannot not leave a legacy. You leave a legacy. Every single one of us. So what will that legacy be? I know what yours will be because you guys are part of a great network and you inspired me when I was listening to the presentations earlier today. We're going to uplift the human condition. We're going to let our students know that we care deeply about them. We are going to improve peace, security, safety on our planets. Thank you for letting me have your time this afternoon. Shall I come down, or do you want to have some question or answer? You want to have some question and answer? Okay. I'll come on down, though, because I'm tired of being on the stage. I liked being out here, if that's all right for everyone. Questions, reactions, concerns? He hablado mucho rápido, ¿no? Demasiado rápido, muchas expresiones, mis manos, todos. Es una explosión de emociones. My wife always says, mi esposa me dice, que cuando estoy hablando en español, que mi voz es siempre más alto. Y mis manos están como pájaros.
¿Otro libro?
Ok. Yo este año descubrí que en Finlandia, que usted mencionó mucho, que tiene una de las mejores educaciones, es el país número 1 con suicidios en jóvenes. Entonces es la parte que usted, es la parte real de la que usted está hablando, que tienen muy buenas estadísticas a nivel educativo. Pero cuando yo me enteré que era el país con más suicidios en toda Europa, es la parte que dices, ya no, pues no parece real, ¿no? Que un país con de las mejores educaciones en el mundo, pues tenga esta situación juvenil.
Great question. Magnifico. That's great. I think you should always ask these critical questions. It's fabulous. So there's a joke that the Finns tell about themselves. And it goes like this. How do you know if you are with an extroverted Finn, an other directed Finn? And the answer is, you're with an extroverted Finn if he is staring at your shoes. The introverted Finn is staring at his shoes. So the way that I experience Finnish culture is it is very Nordic. Of course, they get very short summers there. And they drink a lot, right? And they're very close to the Soviet, well, Russia today. And so there was this expression that was used in the 1960s from a German reporter. He talked about Finlandisierung, and what that means is when you kind of show to the big Russian neighbor that you're not a threat by not publishing books, certain kinds of books, not putting them in your library, not showing certain kinds of movies. So I think that something that's happening in that culture is there is a lot of repression within the culture. And then because we can't be repressed permanently, then you go on these drinking binges. You go up to a cabin in the woods with a friend and you just drink like crazy for 3 days. And I think that that is something that is a dark part of the Finnish story. Basically then, what I would think we always need to be careful about is which countries get chosen to be the exemplars. Which countries get chosen to be the countries that everybody else is supposed to be like. Because even though I do some of that, I put in the interpretive imperative because I don't want us to be slaves to any data. Now, personally, I like more Mediterranean cultures more. So I was very happy when a couple of weeks ago a report came out in the country where people live the longest of any country. Does anybody know which one it is? It will surprise you. It's Italy. Why is it Italy? Fresh seafood, glass of red wine, close by the ocean, care a lot about family. You have a madman as a prime minister. Doesn't matter. That's not important. Right? When I was over there after Trump was elected, we go to talk to our waiter. He says, "How are you doing?" He said, "No, it's terrible. We're so depressed. We have Trump." He says, "Don't worry about it. We had Berlusconi." It was kind of interesting, right? So one of the things is kind of learning to take things in stride, right? Learning to cope, learning to manage. But if you decided that on the basis of your values that life is sacred, I think that you can learn a lot of things from a country like Italy. And we're never going to get Italy to imitate Germany. That's one thing that's not going to happen. I don't care how high their test score results are. Can I just tell you one other story I loved about Italian culture? Now, if my wife was here, she'd say, don't let them get started on talking about Italy. But she's not here. Okay. I was talking to my Italian students in the fall, and they say these international tests like PISA, these things are totally stupid. I said, why? And they said, we don't do any of those kinds of tests in our school. None. Niente. I say, okay, well, what kind of assessment do you do? A lot of conversation. So they do this thing, fare l'interrogazione. So the teacher asks the students questions, and that's how they assess the knowledge. And so then I said to the students, that's really interesting. Where does this come from? They said, oh, from Cicero. It's 2,000-year-old tradition. Do we want a world where the Italians give up that tradition so they can do better on international tests? I don't. Okay. I want a world where there's all this rich diversity of the world's cultures and are reflected in the schools. I think that's what we really need to hold on to right now. So look at the international evidence. Don't worship it. Think instead, what kind of a society do you want to be in? What kind of a world do you want to pass on to the young people? That would be my request to you. Now, I got to warn you guys, am I standing in between these good people and dinner? Because I'm a professor. We know how to talk. Is there another question? There's one back there.
Thank you, Professor, for your wonderful sharing. If I am right, if I have read you well, I understood this is a motivational talk. How a teacher could work with his student in the classrooms. But as you rightly remarked in your presentation, how to balance with the achievement as well as the integrity. And you rightly said India comes to the part of marketism.
Yes.
And a country like India, how can we make that value, the integrity?
Mm-hmm.
How can we balance the achievement and the integrity? Because in India, education is the marketing right now. In this moment, if we take an area of 2 kilometers or 5 kilometers, there will be more or less 10 schools. And each school is competing, looking for achievement. And the people always looking for a school to get admission is to get, because they need their students to reach their goal. So a country like India, how can I balance with the achievement as well as the integrity? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Now, can I just be completely honest? Some of what I'm trying to do is just identify the question, the achievement and integrity question. So I think it would be wrong to say that any school that is a private school cannot have integrity. If so, you should throw me out because I teach in a private Jesuit institution, right? It's more the issue of the culture within the schools and within the buildings. So what is the nature of the relationship between the students and the teacher, and the relationship between the teachers and one another, and the teachers and the parents? My plea is that we work to embellish those relationships with an ethic of care, with consideration of the larger issues that are facing all of us as people. We can't always choose what kind of a school we'll work in, what kind of a community, or what nation. But what we can do is always circle back around to the core values. And for me, the core value is the nature of the interpersonal relationship within the larger miracle of creation. How do we help our young people to experience some of that? So I would be deceiving you if I was to say I have the answers to these issues. You know, in the Socratic dialogues, they almost always end with confusion, which I think is a good model for us. There's one dialogue where Meno says to Socrates, he says, you know, Socrates, whenever I'm with you, it's like I've been stung by a stingray. And then Socrates says, well, I understand. If that's true, I'm a strange kind of stingray, because not only do I paralyze you, I also paralyze myself. But the point there is kind of raising doubt, raising questions, getting us thinking in terms of big ideas. So I think it's possible within schools to do a lot. Think of kind of the best conversations that you've had with colleagues and how you remember them, you know, maybe years later. They told me Heraclitus, they told me you were dead, they brought me bitter words to hear and bitter tears to shed. I wept them as I remembered how often you and I had tired the sun with talking and sent it down the sky. And now that thou art lying, my dear old carrion guest, a handful of grey ashes, long, long ago at rest, still are those gentle voices, those nightingales, awake, for death it taketh all away, but those words it cannot take. Isn't that great? That's Callimachus. It was written in Greek, then translated into Latin, then translated into English. That tells us a story. I think it was written around 3rd century before Christ. It tells us about the impact that a good friend can have on your life.
Buenas. Hola. Hola, hola.
Sí. Gracias por su conferencia, por su charla. Hay una cita de la encíclica Gaudium et Spes del Concilio Vaticano II que dice: el futuro de la humanidad está en manos de aquellos que sepan dar a los jóvenes razones para vivir y razones para esperar. ¿Usted cree que la educación puede dar razones para vivir y razones para esperar? ¿Y cuáles serían esas razones para vivir y para esperar?
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I love that Noche Oscura del Alma, porque es una expresión de nuestra confusión, nuestra duda, nuestras luchas interiores y todos esos. I guess a reason for living, this is the question, is to participate in the connections from one soul to another that can give our lives so much beauty and meaning. And a reason for waiting or hoping, esperar es ambos, no? Es to wait and to hope. Ooh, that's good. Maybe because in the fullness of time, aspects of life are revealed to us. And so having some patience and then being open to grace. Or we were discussing charism, which is, I saw as one of the gifts of, it's a spiritual gift. But this is very important for educators. We have to be open to the spiritual gifts that our students might be willing to give to us. We have to be open to that. We can't be so busy with what we want to say or do that we don't understand the message that they might be giving to us. I don't know why this is, but I think of my daughter right now, who asked me one day, "Daddy, were Moses and Martin Luther King friends?" You know, the words of children, what they kind of put together. And I went to a local school recently, was reading to the 8-year-olds, and they were all immigrant children. And my grandmother was an immigrant. This is something that a lot of Americans seem to have forgotten. My grandmother was born in Ireland. Her mother died in Ireland. Her father came over to Canada. Then he got on a train to go to San Francisco to move the family out. He caught pneumonia and died. So my grandmother is an orphan up in Canada, right? But then an American minister, a Methodist minister, was visiting in Canada, saw this situation and adopted her and brought her down to the United States. So I was teaching these immigrant children, and I told them this story, and then I read them some stories about immigrants, and I thought, okay, this is great, we're gonna have a connection, immigrants, you know, moving, culture, language, it's gonna be great. And then they write me these thank you cards. Dear Dr. Shirley, we're so sorry that your grandmother died. Isn't that beautiful? They were going right for the human connection. They didn't have all this theory stuff. So if you can, be open to those moments, los pequeños milagros de nuestros estudiantes. And you know, maybe especially the students are the most hardened, the most difficult, the ones who make it hard for you to sleep, and who are the same ones that need you so much. And in their fight, they're trying to find a way in the world. So I just want to thank you so much for what you do every day, and for keeping this vision alive, and for teaching me that the first free school that was opened to all children, and they included Jewish students, I understand, was started in Rome by this order 400 years ago now. What a gift to the world. Thank you for that.
Buenas tardes. Usted mencionó que un riesgo del modelo de escuela o de educación que propone es por ejemplo, el imperialismo de mercado, de que la escuela tiene que servir al mercado. Luego presentó el informe de Jacques Delors, La educación encierra un tesoro, que es también tan difundido en el mundo que uno podría decir, bueno, es el discurso imperial. La pregunta es, ¿cuál es el criterio para discernir qué mensaje mundialmente difundido es positivo y cuál no?
You guys are asking me the easy questions. So I don't have any clear answer, but this is kind of the kind of question that I get sometimes in Germany, so I'll give it a kind of a German answer. Immanuel Kant wrote this book called The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, and in it he says we should try to treat other human beings as ends and not as means to something else. And the more that we can treat people as ends, the more moral our acts are. Now, he didn't say that it's immoral to be involved in marketplace relationships. That's what we have to do every day. I give you some money, you give me some food. I pay you some rent, you give me a place to live. All these kinds of things are part of life. But Kant said that has no specific moral content. But if you are working with a student who drives you crazy, why won't you just read? Please read the book. They're driving you crazy, but you still stay with that student even if you really don't want to. These are moral acts. The harder it is to do what you kind of don't want to do, the higher level of morality that there is. So for myself, just personally, that tells me a lot about my moral framework. That also kind of helps me, because you shouldn't leave here and think, I have to be moral all the time. That would be to be moralistic. In the world, we are interacting with people in many different ways, but it does mean when you have to make a choice, that is one point of reference that I have. Am I treating the other person as an end? Now, to say one other thing about that, the greatest gift that you can give to any human being is your undivided attention. Breaks my heart to see these parents today. Parents sitting there with their kid in the restaurant. Child's, mommy, daddy, mommy, daddy. Ooh. Worried about a drug war? These things, frightening, right? So one of the things that we can try and do is when it's so tempting to jump into our device, can we engage with that person who is right in front of us? They might be dying of loneliness. These are things that I think about. But please don't think that I have all this worked out. Please don't. That would be a big mistake. And if you think I have it all worked out, I can give you my wife's phone number. She can tell you where the bodies are buried.
Aquí hay una.
Well, I thank you, Professor, for this beautiful evening. And we have been reflecting upon the integral formation with a very successful achievement in the life of a student. And I would like to connect with our founder, Saint Joseph Calasanz, one of the pioneers of education, who has first thought of the integral formation of a student and giving him success in his life. And reflecting upon this, because I am doing a research on his pedagogy, and reflecting upon this, looking at the global tendencies in the world, I am little scared as an educator, as a Calasanzian, to apply this methodology of integrity with success in our schools, because there is a tendency from the part of the families where they reflect or they believe when it is highly paid for education, in return they will receive qualitative education. So in case of our schools, my schools, where we insist on free education, and even if we give the best education freely, it is not given, it is not taken with value, it is not accepted as easy. So we are in a complex situation. We would like to give the best education, and if it is freely given, it is not really, how do you say it, really valued. So where are we now as looking at the global tendencies as Calasanzian educators? Because you are also working in a religious institution, you would like to give your experiences to enlighten us a bit. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. This is the cri de cœur, right? The cry from the heart of the educator who is not fully appreciated. So I try to think of working with parents as a developmental process, just like working with students is. And when parents are acting that way, I try to understand. There's a lot in the world right now that would make them afraid for their children's future. There's a lot. What's going to happen now with self-driving vehicles? Think of the massive unemployment that will be coming in 5 to 10 years with that. Think of all the other forms of automation that are coming. I understand why the parents are afraid. On the other hand, kind of if they get too narrow with their focus, they won't be preparing their children to be agile. At my university in Boston College, I get students from remember the thing that was high achievement, low integrity? So I get students who've been marched through years and years of school and told what to do, and their parents were always watching what they were doing. And they get to university and they fall apart because they don't know how to do anything independently. They don't know how to take any risks. They're very, very insecure. And now it's very strange. We're studying the rise of depression and anxiety. and it's highest among the poorest students and the wealthiest students. The wealthiest and most privileged ones have very, very high rates of depression and anxiety because their parents won't let them breathe. There's a scene in a movie, what was this, Robin Williams or Steve Martin, where you see this parent talking. The parent is saying, you have to do this, because otherwise, your future's doomed, and you have to make sure you get into Stanford or Harvard or Columbia. And then the camera moves, and the parent is talking to a 2-year-old, right? And you kind of get that hyper anxiety projected upon the child. Now, I feel fortunate because I grew up in a world in which it was still possible to go out in nature, go for a walk, get lost in the woods, waste time. Isn't that wonderful when you just kind of can let the afternoon, that's Neruda, right? Leaning into the afternoon. Leaning into the afternoon. You don't rush it. And Neruda, I love his autobiography. Now, he was a complicated person, okay, so let's not go to some of those parts there. But he said the secret to being a poet is having time to pay attention to the things that nobody else notices because they're all too busy. So how do we kind of create that mental space where you can start noticing the things that are maybe right in front of you that we just don't pay attention to because we're hurrying off to the next thing? It's really important to take that time. Can we do that? I don't know that we can, because everything's in overdrive now. Everything's speeding up. This is the new big word, accelerationism. Everything has to go faster. We have to have it immediately. So I wonder if there's ways, and they're called retreats, right? So go on a prayer retreat, go on a meditative retreat, to withdraw from the world a bit and reconnect, aprofundizar la vida, profundizar las experiencias. We go deeper, gravitas, depth, slow down time. I had another teacher, I'm sorry, you'll have to stop me, but when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher. He taught us Einstein's theory of relativity. I was 12. And he said, okay, so the universe is expanding, but there's some people who say that the expansion of the universe is slowing down. And then he got us thinking about how time and space are related, and I could figure out that time could slow down because I knew it always did Friday after lunch. When the weekend, I just knew time could slow down, right? But then he said to us, well, maybe time could slow down so much that time could stop. And he gave me the greatest gift of my 12-year-old life, which was I was in this stage that Jean Piaget calls formal operations, where you're figuring out that there's rules in the world. And no, time can't stop. So he let us argue with him. And guess what? He let us argue with him for an hour after school. That was 1966. This is 2017. He gave me this gift, which was, I didn't stay after school because I wanted to play with my friends. I got to stay after school to argue with a teacher about whether time could stop. Well, you want to know how to get your students to become teachers? Do that. Just throw a crazy idea at them and let them have at you, and then stay afterwards. Changed my life. Be careful, I'll tell you about more favorite teachers I had.
I hate myself now because I have to stop this very interesting discussion and your very interesting presentation. We have just did what you were talking about, so we took our time with what we liked. So we enjoyed really these moments. I think you all agree with me that these moments were very beautiful moments, and it was worth to divert a little bit from our agenda. We asked Dennis to talk about education as a worldwide process, so globally, what is going on globally. And we also wanted to have a look at this world of the education from a bird's eye point of view, looking at this whole thing which is called education. And maybe you agree with me when I say that we are very much in harmony with your vision, and it gives us great passion, and we are grateful for the heritage that we inherited from St. Joseph of Calasanz. But we could also experience that this heritage is something very challenging for us. So it is something that we inherited, and it is something which is before us. It is 400 years of history behind us, and it's a challenging future which is in front of us. So thank you very much for making us aware of this heritage that we have behind us, this heritage that we have before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josef.
Gracias, Denis, por regalarnos este maravilloso momento, estas reflexiones. Y ahora continuamos y vamos fuera de hora, pero como somos todos maestros, sabemos que tenemos que improvisar, ¿no? Como en nuestra clase, no pasa nada. Entonces, haremos lo siguiente. Ahora nos iremos tranquilamente a tomar un café que tenéis preparado en la zona del bar. Y después lo que haríamos sería retrasar el inicio de la experiencia. Digo la experiencia porque lo que haremos es hacer solo una repetición de la experiencia, no haremos dos, y así nos ajustamos un poco al timing. Entonces, para apuntarnos a las experiencias tenéis la guía que os hemos dejado encima de la mesa, tenéis todas las experiencias que haremos los 3 días. Si os fijáis, tenéis las 7 del día de hoy, y para saber o apuntarnos a la que queráis asistir tenéis colgados unas listas en el bar donde vosotros mismos os podréis apuntar. Hemos puesto un límite de 30 personas en cada una para tenerlas compensadas, más o menos. Entonces, mientras tomáis el café, elegís con la lista en qué experiencia queréis participar, os apuntáis y veréis también que os indicamos la sala y el edificio donde se realiza la experiencia. Hay 3 edificios, el de Loyola, que es el principal donde estamos comiendo y haciendo el café ahora, pero también hay 2 edificios donde estáis alojados buena parte del grupo. Uno es el San Luis y el otro es el edificio Padre Hurtado, que están al lado del edificio principal. Localizáis qué edificio es donde se realiza vuestra experiencia, ¿sí? Y tendríais que estar a las 7 en punto en la sala que pertoca. Y entonces haríamos una única experiencia, más o menos de 1 hora, para que también podamos disfrutarla y podáis hacer las preguntas que queréis a la persona que la llevará. ¿De acuerdo? Muchas gracias.